Good morning and welcome to Selkirk Baptist Church. Today in the States, it's Martin Luther King Sunday, and tomorrow will be Martin Luther King Day and a holiday. I sometimes get asked, why would a Canadian celebrate American holiday? But for me, Martin Luther King is not just an American hero, he is a hero of the faith. He's a worldwide hero, a worldwide renowned person for us to honor and to celebrate. For those of you who don't know, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his work. Martin Luther King Day matters because it recognizes that Dr. King's legacy of service, while inspiring us to serve in our own ways, continues on. A lot of the things Dr. King advocated during his lifetime, racial justice, economic equality, affordable housing, labor rights, etc. See, Martin Luther King took his faith and he applied it to the world around him. He called out the injustices that he saw and became a champion for those who were oppressed. He reminded the church that faith and action go hand in hand, that faith wades even into such taboo topics as politics. He reminds us that our faith calls us to be justice warriors for a God. We in Canada should never be blind to the social injustices in our own country. There is still racial discrimination. There's the plight of the LGBTQ plus community, Indigenous communities who suffer, many without clean drinking water. And so the legacy of Martin Luther King is one that speaks into the church, not only in his day, but in our day. Today, I've chosen two passages. And the first one comes from Esther, and it's in the 4th chapter. Now, to understand this passage, we have to understand some of the background that led up to this. You see, Mordecai, who is an uncle, has sent a message to Esther about the plight that he is in and the plight of the Jewish people. And he's waiting for Esther's response. He is hoping that she will become an ally and an advocate for him and for the Jewish people. Her response is not what he expected. She says, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces knows that for any man or any woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned by the king, they could be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter that spares their lives. 30 days have passed since I have been called to go to the king. So she is reluctant to get involved because of the fear of the king's wrath and death. And when Mordecai hears Esther's response, he responds back. And he tells her, don't think that just because you're in the king's palace that you will escape the plight of the Jewish people. And he reminds her that if she keeps silent at such a time as this, if she is silent in the midst of this atrocities, in the midst of this injustice, in the midst of the death of her people, that God will act in a different way. But you and your family, your father's family, will perish. But then he says this, who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for such a time as this. He is challenging her to see her place in the kingdom as God ordained. That God has put her in this place, in this time, for a reason. Ever asked yourself if God has put you in this place and this time for a specific reason? I entitled my sermon, If You Don't Take a Chance, You Don't Stand a Chance. By taking a chance, I really mean by seizing the opportunity that is before you. Here, Esther is given an opportunity to save God's people. She's been informed by Mordecai of the situation and the looming destruction of the Jewish population. But Esther, at the beginning, is unable to see God's hand in this. Instead, is paralyzed by her fear. She's afraid to take a chance. Now, we need to understand what is happening in the king's palace. Basically, the king is having a drunken party. It's been going on for over 30 days. No one is allowed to disturb it unless they have been sent for by the king. And we're told that Esther has not been sent for 30 days. Now, we also need to know that Esther is actually the second queen, the replacement. Vashti was the first. And she stood up to the king. And what did he do? He had her replaced. This is a man-dominated world. If the party disturbed, it could mean death unless the king raises his golden scepter. So Esther has this opportunity, an opportunity to save her people, but she's afraid to take a chance. Mordecai's response is just absolutely wonderful. He reminds her that, first of all, she could face the same fate and the consequences of the other Jews, death. So if you don't go to see the king, you still can be facing death. And he tells her that if she is silent at a time like this, well, God will act in a different way. Too often we have been silent while we have witnessed injustices that don't affect us. Mordecai goes on to say that perhaps you have come to the royal dignity for just a time such as this. In other words, you have been placed in the kingdom as queen for this very reason. He is reminding Esther she has the opportunity, the chance to be part of God's plan, but also reminds her that God's plan of deliverance is not dependent on her. It's going to happen regardless. But maybe God is giving her a chance, an opportunity to be a part of God's plan. As the story continues, Esther does go to see the king. And he is actually delighted to see her, and he does raise his scepter. As you read on in the story, you'll find out that God's people are saved. Now, the second passage is a small blurb from a much bigger passage about Daniel and his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those, for those of us who've gone through Sunday school, been the veterans of Sunday school, it's a familiar story. We know of Daniel in the lion's den. We know of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who refused to bow down to worship a golden statue and are threatened to be thrown into the fiery furnace. And this is the moment where this passage picks up. See, the king has told the nation that everyone has to bow down and worship his idol. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have refused. And now they are facing the fate of the fiery furnace. They're being given the opportunity to repent, one last chance, do the bidding of the king, and they can be spared. And here's their response. If our God, who we serve, is able to deliver us from this blazing fiery out of hand, O king, let us deliver him. Let him deliver us. But if not, be it known, O king, that we will not serve your gods and we will not worship their golden statue that you have set up. Again, another powerful passage. Here they are recognizing that God has the ability to save them. They don't know whether God will or will not, but their faith is not dependent on God intervening. Their faith is still in God as the sovereign God. And they choose not to serve the king's idols or the king's gods. They are prepared to be martyred for their faith. You see, they had a chance, an opportunity to go along with the status quo, to follow the crowd. Or they had the chance and the opportunity to witness to their faith. And despite facing death, they will not be deterred. You know, Micah 6 says this, and it's often referred to as the Micah mandate. And it gives balance to the spiritual and the political questions of our day. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. We don't take a chance. We don't stand a chance. We're given opportunities all the time. But sometimes we allow our fear to paralyze us. Sometimes it is simply our indifference. It doesn't really affect me. It's not really my problem. We're reminded how we treat each other is important. We should be reminded how we vote is important. How we serve is important. The missions that we participate in are important. If we don't take a chance, we don't stand a chance. See, God's plan is happening with or without us. The question is, will we be part of God's justice? Will we walk humbly with our God and love mercy and walk humbly with our God? We can be part of the solution, or sadly, we can be part of the problem. I want to share with you some quotes from Martin Luther. And they're kind of convicting quotes. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Did Mordecai caution Esther not to be silent at a time like this? In the end, we will be remembered not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Wow. To ignore evil is to become an accomplice to it. We must be concerned not merely about who murdered them, but about the system, the way of life, the philosophy which produced the murderers. It is speaking to the systematic racism, to the systematic injustices in our system. He goes on to say the ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and the cruelty by bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. See, our passages in Esther and Daniel as well as Martin Luther, calls us to be a people who serve, to be a people who seek justice, a people who refuse to be silent at a time such as this. The story of Esther reminds us to stand up for people who are being marginalized, even when that puts us in uncomfortable or risky positions. The story reminds us to be part of the solution. God's plan, not to be part of the problem. The story reminds us that God is ultimately in control. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego reminds us to stand firm in our faith, even when it means we might face death. It reminds us that regardless of the events that transpire, we hold on to our faith. Our faith is not based on what we get from God. Our faith causes us to give to our God. As Micah mandate says, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. Are you ready? Are you ready to take a chance so that we might stand a chance? Amen.